Back for another InitVerse talk show today with David Lancashire, the co-founder of Saito. We've talked before, but never on this show since I started working for InitVerse. And also joining me today is Addy. He's an advisor to InitVerse. So welcome also to Addy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on the show. Pleasure to meet you both. Our second time, my first time with Addy. So.
Yeah, it's your first time, but yeah, looking forward to hear about Saito and you can learn about other things as well. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, so like I said, David and I have talked before. It was 873 days ago, so I'm sure there's a lot that's transpired over that time frame. I looked it up.
I'm not giving you a day-by-day breakdown, or it's just not going to happen.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so for the people who don't know, I forget how you said you pronounced it last time. Is it Saito or Saito? We both pronounced it different.
Both.
Okay,
it's both. We checked in Inception, and the characters pronounce his name differently, and so it's a free-for-all. You can do whichever way you want.
I'm going to pronounce it Saito. For the people who don't know, give just like a broad overview of Saito Blockchain and basically what you guys were trying to achieve in the beginning from the onset of the project.
Sure. I mean, we can talk about it. The short version is we believe proof of work and proof of stake mechanisms have fundamental economic problems. They're dependent on constant token inflation, or they're dependent on volunteers, or they give control of the nodes that are needed to run the network to the private sector. And those basically they control access to transactions to make money in various ways that hurt what blockchains are supposed to be, which are open and non-excludable networks. These problems aren't really recognized in proof of work and proof of stake because there's no solution to them in those mechanisms. But Saito is a blockchain that fixes them. And the way it fixes them is instead of paying for an extractive form of work like mining and staking, what it does is it pays the nodes that bring the money into the network. And the more money you bring into the network, the more you get paid. So it's kind of like a company that pays on commissions for sales instead of like paying only the people that, that buy paint and not paying for labor. That's a terrible analogy, but if it fixes economics on the most fundamental level. So we can talk about it with problems. What are we doing? We're building the blockchain that does it. And because it fixes problems with scaling, because the money goes to whatever choke point is that's preventing more money coming in, and that can be scale. So one of the big differences between the Saito blockchain and Ethereum, for instance, is Ethereum and a lot of proof of stake networks, they've got like Infura, where they've got these companies that are usually VC funded that are designed to give people JSON requests and run API keys. And in the Saito blockchain, those are funded actually out of consensus. So you don't need the off-chain business models. You don't need the off-chain pressures that add closure and monetize transactions. How's that?
Yeah, that was a pretty good overview.
Yeah.
What makes it so you mentioned Ethereum. Obviously is like moving a lot of their economic activity to the layers on top. What makes you guys so scalable?
Well, one way to think about scale is it's a function of getting money to the network. And if you've got a network with, 10,000 in fees per hour, how scalable is the network that spends 10,000 of those dollars on mining versus the network that spends 9,900 of those dollars on the actual server hardware that's moving the data? So that's one way. That's one of the really simple ways to think about scaling, is that scale is a function of throwing money at data throughput. And the networks that throw the most money at data throughput are the most scalable. It's hard in blockchain because people have these ideas, like there are trade-offs that people make. They'll say things like, well, we're going to get big scale by only having 10 validators. And they've got these technical reasons, right? Like if you have an unlimited number of validators, they all need to communicate and bandwidth explodes. But with 10, that's the sweet spot, and we can get so over many transactions per second. And people think of it like a blockchain. We don't, because we think as soon as you have those models, what you're really doing is you're adding something called closure. And you've got this mechanism that is protected where not anyone can just start voting. So it's not like Bitcoin. It's not a really permissionless network. And in order to have some of the security properties we want, you need to have total permissionlessness. Scale's a hard one. I mean, we can talk about the trilemma if you want. We got to
go
read
ahead.
on that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, let's just go ahead and get into it because
sure, I'll give you my triangle rant. I'll try to keep it short. I love it. It's because if you look at like the Ethereum people, there's this thing where Vitalik is trying to solve a problem, and he's trying to solve the scaling problem in like 2016 or so, or 17 or 15. And what he's trying to do is he's like, well, we're paying all of the money for stakers. And the problem he's trying to sort out is, can we get money away from stakers and spend it on network nodes? Because either you need more powerful servers, right? But if you need more powerful servers, more money needs to be spent on the servers. Or you need more decentralization. Well, more decentralization means you need more servers. So he's like, well, there's a triangle. And the problem he's trying to think through is he can't figure out, because if he takes money away from the stakers, or you take money away from the miners, then the return on investment to mining and staking falls. And if the ORI falls, you get less of the activity. If you get less of the activity, security goes down, it gets easier to attack. So what he kind of intuited, but he couldn't figure it out because he's approaching it as a technical problem, but it's really an economic problem, is on all of these networks, you've got a fixed amount of money, which is the fees that are being paid in equilibrium. And they're like, oh, well, we've got the block reward. And it's like, yeah, no, that goes away. In equilibrium, the value is what the fees pay. You can spend it on security, which is cost of attack. Or if you take money away and you increase the throughput by scale, you're spending more on your servers, and so your profits fall. Or you have more computers on the network, more decentralization. And there's this scale and decentralization trade-off, because it's like buying a computer, you know, and you're putting it together as a kid with hardware, right? Like you can buy a better monitor, but then the motherboard is less powerful. Or you buy a stronger CPU, but then you've got less memory. So it's an economic trade-off between scale and decentralization. And security comes in because security is also this economic issue. And one of the big problems with talking about the trilemma is people love drawing triangles. So they're like, what he was saying is there's a triangle and like Ethereum is here and Solana is there and something else is in this corner. And, you know, they love it because as long as they can put a label and a crypto token, like ticker somewhere in the triangle, it's kind of like they're staking out a unique value proposition. And it's like, no, that's not the trilemma. The trilemma is proof of work and proof of stake. All of your security is coming from the return on investment for staking and mining. And if you're increasing scale, you're pulling money away. This is what Solana does. They pull money away from the stakers and they say, okay, well, we're going to force you to buy a more expensive rig. And there are various ways to manage the trade-offs, but they're all bad, you know? And sometimes they play games. Like a lot of the Solana people, there was this wonderful moment last year where they were like, they got really enthusiastic about MEV. Do you remember this?
No. To be honest.
Okay, I saw like a bunch of Sol influencers like MEV is great because it's how we're going to pay for the network, you know, and they're kind of like treating it like it's free money, you know, because they can't, if they lower the return on investment for stakers, then the security goes down. But if the network nodes can like fleece the users of money by MEVing them, it's like, well, we've got a business model. We've achieved incentive compatibility. And what they don't, you know, it's like, oh, well, it sounds nice until you realize that if you're fleecing someone by charging them higher exchange rates, well, they're going to pay a lower on-chain fee because fundamentally fee tolerance, like, well, you can divide up the fee in various ways, but it's still my willingness to use the system is capped by the value that I'm getting from it. So
that's a good overview. Yeah, I appreciate your insights on it. I'm in the camp where I appreciate all these different. I'm the ultimate capitalist, I guess you could say. So I love the competition, and I think the economic, like where the economic utility is, that the money.
It's weird. We're some of the most hardcore libertarians, and thinking about the problem this way makes networks like Bitcoin really kind of weirdly non-libertarian, right? Because what they're saying, Bitcoin says, we need to keep the network small so costs are small because we need the volunteers to run the network. If the volunteers don't run the network, like companies are going to control transaction flow, and some miners will be rich and others will be poor, and the network loses permissionlessness. But at the same time, and so you say, well, that's great, Bitcoin. You guys really understand that volunteer provision is protecting your network. And they go, oh, no, it's all about incentives. So there's this weird cognitive dissonance going on in the proof of work space. And then the proof of stake space, they're like, we're the experts. But as soon as you start talking about economics, they really struggle with it as well, because they see it as a technical problem.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to step on you there at the end of the sentence. The economic theory has kind of gone by the wayside of Bitcoin. When I got into Bitcoin, it was like only people who like read, the Austrian school, and they were like hardcore proponents of like reading economics and stuff. And now it's kind of just like, let's get rich. But Addy, do you have anything you wanted to ask as far as
Yeah, for sure. So this is the one of the like innovative things that I hear in the long term. So if you see for the Bitcoin, the 30% is still holded by the exchanges, the supply, right? And like things are decentralized, but are in the centralized, but at different terms. So you will see like
they don't even know what decentralization means. It's like the proof of stake people. Go ahead.
The SUI network, when it was hacked and all the validators combined and stopped that contract address. Maybe if you have heard it or not, but they agreed that, so there was a hack in the SUI network in the CETAS protocol. So they voted and like literally stopped that account that is hacked the wallet. So there was not a decentralization. There was still some like person that is doing all this.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know this, but that happened on Ethereum a while back too. They basically just rolled back the network, right? Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's advantageous. A lot of the confusion about what decentralization is comes from proof of stake, and it's convenient, right? Because like one of the things that we believe, we said, well, permissionlessness is the important property. It's non-excludability. So the reason people want decentralization is because they want a network that's not controlled by someone. Okay, so it's not really decentralization they want. It's the lack of control. But why are you afraid of someone controlling something? And it's like, well, they're afraid that that person will exclude other people in ways that benefit them and hurt others. So they're really concerned about non-excludability. But decentralization is a technical property. Non-excludability is non-negotiable. Like as soon as you add governance, there are a lot of people that are like governance, voting. And the problems you're talking about here. Now, governance, you can say governance is decentralized because it's a voting system with 5 people, or maybe it's a voting system with 2 people and one of them has 4 identities, but it's distributed. And they say, well, that's decentralized. It's not non-excludable. This is also something with Saito, we say, actually, we don't really care about decentralization. We care about non-excludability. And the reason for that is if you have a non-excludable network, the network can always reconfigure itself to whatever topological state you want. Like a centralized network can get more decentralized if it's non-excludable, because it's not gonna complain if you add a node. However, if you have these other networks like Sway or the proof of stake networks, as soon as they get centralized, the economic pressures prevent them from re-decentralizing because the voting power is all in these centralized factions. And so there are issues with Ethereum now. I don't know if you're following the, like they have, I think 2 companies now that are proposing 90% of the block bundles for the validators. And it's like, oh, well, you can say it's topologically decentralized because you don't look at the centralized components, you look at the stakers. So.
Yeah, that's very interesting the way you put it about centralization. You could look, just going back to like economic theory or something again, you can look at like states and how, once a state becomes highly centralized, there's really no way back, or very little hope, aside from
Well, it's like, well, why do you want non-excludability? It's the original value of the internet is that it interprets censorship as damage and wraps around it. You want the ability to add nodes because if some guy's got if he's got something going and he's ripping you off, well, you're better off setting up your own node. So non-excludability, it's the property people think that decentralization provides. And one of the problems with Bitcoin is that often it's volunteer provision in a lot of these networks that does that. And so you can, when you understand the economic side of it, you can see like Vitalik, they say, oh, well, we're getting the incentives right. But we need people, we need more home stakers. It's like, well, yeah, you want volunteers because fundamentally you are falling back to volunteers as your form of security because your economic model's broken.
I'm curious how you guys are interpreting or thinking about interoperability with other blockchains then, because are you guys compatible with other layer ones where I think that's a major value unlock personally. I forget this part about Saito. So can you tell us like is that something I don't know if you're focused on or you guys are
Well, I mean, I know there are a bunch of networks where they're like, people have these scaling problems and they say, well, we're going to want these kind of cross-chain transfers. So they design their transactions so they're optimal for this one use case. Saito's not like that. In Saito, a transaction just has a fixed data. So there's no protocol in the network that says you can use it for this or you can't use it for that. So you could use it. You could use it for the same purposes as those other networks that are doing cross-chain connections.
Mhm.
But we believe that the fundamental solution is, well, you pay for scale and then you get an economically optimal network and you're going to scale much better than those guys too. Like, so if you want, whatever you want to use it for, it's better designed for that.
Oh, that makes sense.
That being said, our growth strategy isn't to cater to cross chain exchanges or position ourselves as an L2.
Right, 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 right. Addy, do you have anything you want to add there?
Yeah, so I just explored the site website. There's a lot like we'll go to video call. So how does that work with DRTC or something like that, or
It's
beyond
great.
that?
We're using the blockchain for firewall traversal, and then you get a peer-to-peer connection, and you can send video and audio or data content directly. So,
Mhm.
I mean, the advantage of that is if you're one of the advantages, say we're using Zoom. Zoom always hits you up for it's got
Yeah,
this centralized point of control. It's controlling the connection point because that's how they make money. Well, on a blockchain, it's open source. You don't need to. Long term, you may need to pay a tiny network fee, but what you're doing there is you're connecting with the other guy's address, and you're usually sending him things like, "This is my IP address. Here's a little bit of information you can send to me and hit my firewall and try to penetrate it and connect directly."
Mhm.
So what's happening there is Saito, the network, is being used to bootstrap a peer-to-peer mesh network. The beautiful thing is, and so when you've got that, you can do video conferencing calls all you want. It's free. No time limits, no upsells on software. People can customize it. So we're expecting like video call applications where Saito, the network token, is basically deeply integrated. Like you've got to spend this much per minute to talk to me. Um, but the network is basically creating a mesh network, and then that mesh network is now routing transactions and feeding value back into the core network. So there's method to the madness, but the fun thing isn't the fact that you've got the video call. The fun thing is the fact that you've got a consensus mechanism that not only lets you really easily create this upper layer mesh network, but as soon as you've got it, like if I'm connected to you and I want to make a transaction, I'm going to send you the transaction because if you relay it onto the network, you might be able to get me faster inclusion on the chain. And in that case, you're going to make money. So there starts to be an economic incentive for people to operate these data services that right now are centralized with Infura. Whereas on Saito, like if I'm connecting to anyone, they're going to be sending me transactions. And if I can figure out how to get those transactions to the guy who's going to make the next block faster, I've got a really good chance of getting paid.
Yeah, I was just going to show. Uh, if you're in the blockchain space, there are a lot of cool dApps,
Go
but
to the arcade. The arcade it's where most people are. We're this weird project because you get the crypto types, and the crypto types, they fixate on price and token, and a lot of it's like hype. We've actually got applications, and if you go to the arcade, you'll see like there are people playing games, and often these people are not crypto people at all. So it's this weird uh, almost schizophrenic kind of network where we've got the crypto people who don't necessarily play the games, and we've got the games people who don't necessarily play crypto.
yeah, one of
Um,
the things in Interverse is I guess that's like the in the middle of everything that the product relationship would be our SaaS builder. So dApps is something that we're very interested in. I was also looking at your Red Square is super cool. It's definitely advanced since the last time I was on it. So It's
Well, it's
basically,
pretty old school. We've got a revamp coming through, which is going to make it a lot more like Twitter on style. You know,
yeah.
it's kind of a little bit off, and people are sometimes, um,
I like how it looks, to be honest with you. I kind of
Yeah.
like the
mm,
it's I don't know. There's something about it. I like that style.
mm,
But I'll be excited to check it out when it's done, the update. But it reminds me a little bit of Hive, which used to be Steam.
mm,
Uh,
yeah.
and there, I don't know how much you messed around with that or looked into that, but
Mm,
kind of reminds me a little bit of that. But I was on that network for a while, and
mm,
not as far as like technical stuff, but just like the look. And I always thought that there was like a major there was a lot of
mhm,
utility in like having your social
yeah.
networks on chain. So
Well, I mean, the goal is like, you know, Bitcoin's strategy is we've got the block reward. We're going to spend it on network security and hope that bootstraps the network. With Saito consensus, we can't actually have a block reward. And one of the reasons for that is the security mechanism requires it's kind of like a game, but it's a game that is profitable to play if you're playing with other people's money. So if you're an honest node on the network, you're collecting transactions from people. And if you use them, you get to make a block, you produce a block. And it's like, oh, well, I've got a chance of making money now. The way you have to attack this, if you're a malicious node, is, well, you play that game, but you start spending your own money to create fake work. And this is the revolutionary economic problem. It's not fixable in proof of work, not fixable in proof of stake. You'll often read academic papers where people will say it's a general property of blockchain that it's always free for a block producer to put their own money in a block. Not true. Saito fixes that, and the result is that if you're attacking the network, you need to spend your own money. But if you're spending your own money, the way the network works is in equilibrium. You're going to get less back than you're spending. So there are all of these really wonderful and weird properties that come out of fixing these economic problems. And one of them is if you've got, 51% of the network tokens, if you keep attacking, very shortly you're going to have less than 51% because you're spending your own money and you're getting less back.
right.
And actually, not only are you getting less back, but the honest people whose blocks you're censoring, because you're preventing them from spending their transactions, they actually have some claims on payment. So malicious people, their share of the network shrinks, and honest people's share of the network grows. There's no other mechanism like this. It's really fun, though, for people who are kind of into consensus because it's very different than proof of work and proof of stake.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about that. Like, how do you keep? Is that how you keep people from spamming the network, like with
Yeah.
inside the social media app or
Well, it's interesting. The network right now, we're kind of designed so we accept zero fee transactions. So the growth strategy is kind of a freemium model, right? Like we're going to set up a server, we're going to have this open source software, it's going to demo to people. You can do this. So maybe there's someone who has a third party crypto and they want that crypto running on Saito. There are ways to do this. They could clone the open source repository, and now they've got a version of Red Square that is dedicated to their own crypto. They've got video calls that work with their own crypto, and they're also now collecting the money from their own users. As far as like spam goes, there are challenges specific to Red Square, but those are mostly around like curation and whitelisting and blacklisting. Because in the crypto space, there are a lot of really noxious individuals, and it's like if you open the gate, like they will be vicious about your project and they will attack you. And you're kind of, it's like, well, okay, it's a permissionless network, but we still need to create utility. So how you do that works differently than Twitter. But as far as spam goes, at the end of the day, like if the blockchain is filling up and people want to use it, it's it's fee based. And so the question is, how do you get the value up to transition to the fee based model?
One other thing
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about the dApps, and then sorry, let me ask this real quick, Addy, and then I'll shoot it over to you. I don't remember a lot about Sato Chat. I think I used it for a little bit like I said, we talked about 3 years ago or
Yeah.
2.5 years ago. It's encrypted, or I can't remember. Can you just
Yeah.
give details on it?
Well, here's one thing you can do. When you go to a bank website and
Yeah.
you go to a bank website and that little secure lock box, it shows up and it says, hey, you're encrypted. What you've normally done is something called a Diffie-Hellman key exchange. which means I create a private key pair, you do, we go through an exchange of data. It's 3 steps, after which we both have a private key that no one can break, and we can use that to encrypt communications. What Saito does is it supports that. So if you add a contact in your chat list or you add a friend, what you do is you send them a message and you say, I want to be a friend. And that message is the first step in the key exchange process. And when they get it, well, they'll send you a reply back, and then you're basically both connected at that point. There's a 3rd step, but the 2 steps almost get you 100%. And at that point, you've got a private key. So yeah, you can encrypt anything. It's not just chat. You can actually use applications, and you could play a game of poker. And not only is poker using cryptographic techniques, a lot of casinos with crypto, they're like, you deposit with crypto, you withdraw with crypto, but at the end of the day, it's a server that's dealing the cards, and there's some guy that can break it. Or do you trust it? Do you trust their controls? With Saito, it's actually entirely peer-to-peer. And not only is like dealing a deck of cards, we use a cryptographic technique where there's no middleman. Not only is there no middleman in dealing, but you can actually, if you've got that shared secret, your entire game can be encrypted. At which point the blockchain, it shows that this address has sent information to this other address, but no one even knows that it's a game of poker. And that works for essentially any application that you want to build. So there are benefits to this kind of approach, but the cryptography is fundamental. It's not something that's new to blockchain. It's, I believe the technique was invented in the late 70s by the RSA guys.
I'm not sure. I know there's going to be, I really do believe there's going to be a resurgence of like people who are super interested in privacy as we move on here in crypto, especially with like, you know, kind of like what we talked about just in the Bitcoin space. And overall,
you ask a question, I geek out about cryptography.
Oh, I love it.
And economics, you know?
About it. Yeah. We only have about 5 minutes left though. So Addy, go ahead and ask that question you had.
Yeah, so you mentioned about cloning a repo and then using that with their own crypto, right? So are there any limitations, or it's like free for all, like doing that?
It
Or
depends
after,
on the module. What you're seeing, the arcade is an application that runs in the browser.
okay,
And the same application can run on a server. So if you wanted to, you can have a really lightweight application that just connects to a third-party edge point, crypto, right? And maybe it's a username and a password, and then all of the magic's done there. Or maybe you have a light client in the application, and it stores the private key, and it signs things, and then it sends requests out. Or you can take the same modeling and say, actually, I'm going to put an entire Bitcoin client into a Saito module. So how you build the application determines the limitations and the trust requirements. Saito, it's kind of like an operating system for this sort of thing. So it's not like other networks. Like other networks, they've got one way of doing things because that's how they figure they're going to solve scaling, and then it just breaks apart.
yeah, you can find out your own ways of scaling, right? And as you mentioned, like, right?
Well, the approach to scaling is the limitation for scaling universally is how much money you have going through the network. And because you've got 3 cost sinks, you've got the security cost sink, which you get by paying miners and stakers. And the things that pull money away from those profits are the costs of running the servers, which are scale, and the number of machines that are on the network, because whatever the scale is, you multiply the scale by the number of machines. This is the cost of running the network. And so Bitcoin works where if the cost is higher than income, people will shut down miners, right? So decentralization falls. And this is the nature of the trade-off, right? Like if you've got all 3 of these corners of your triangle in equilibrium, if you want to increase scale, the money has to come from somewhere. And so it has to come from security, lower security, or it has to come from decentralization, fewer nodes. And it's the same for all points of the triangle. This is what the trilemma is. Now, people are going around and they're saying, well, it's a technical thing. We need to find out what technically it's describing. And it's like, no. They want to have a technical explanation because if they define it technically, they can cheat in a way they can find something to fix. Like there's a lot of braided chain approaches where they're like, oh, well, we beat the trilemma. And if you understand the economic structure, it's not, because they're like, these other braids are securing our braid. And so we've got free security. And it's like, yeah, but you're now needing to verify and validate 4 braids, which means your processing throughput is 1/4, right? So there's the ways of technically viewing at it are well-intentioned, but they cheat in ways that make it solvable and ways it's not solvable. And there's a lot of others where they'll sneak volunteers into the system. Like there's a lot of DAGs, and people are like, oh, DAGs, small blocks, super scalable. But they don't realize that, well, actually, your throughput is limited by the server. So, there are some advantages to latency, but in equilibrium, you've got the same problem because your throughput of the entire network is limited by the number of transactions any server can validate in a second. So there, the advantage of the economic way of looking at the trilemma is actually teaches you where technical designs are broken.
Now I have to put that in my notes because hopefully we get to talk again soon. I want to talk about DAGs and stuff because I used DAGs for some transactions. I thought it was cool. I didn't realize
they're great.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of these things where one of the advantages of the DAG is if you have volunteers running the hardware, it's designed for that, right? However, if we're talking like there are a bunch of DAG projects out there where they're like, oh, well, we've solved the trilemma. And it's like, no, you haven't.
Oh, right.
And you're like, if you actually dig into the network design, it's fascinating because if you talk to the devs, there's like 1 or 2 questions you can ask them that they can't answer. And so it's interesting, with network designs, like, well, what about this? And they can't answer it because if they answer it, it kind of forces the lie to the surface. And, people aren't malicious. They genuinely think of the world in terms of technical problems.
Right.
But this problem is not a technical problem. This is like, you've got $1. How much milk do you want and how much butter do you want? You can't buy the maximum amount of both. You've got $1. You got to make some trade-offs.
We only have about 90 seconds. Like I said, I could sit here and talk to you all day. You're one of the most interesting people I've talked to, honestly. So I appreciate talking to you a lot.
Well, anytime you want to chat, why don't we call it here?
I just was going to say if you wanted to talk about anything upcoming for you guys or how you're looking at the rest of this year, maybe.
I mean, come visit the arcade, I think, and people will get a sense of applications that aren't possible elsewhere. We have token persistence that's launching in September. That's where the amount of Saito that will persist on the network falls to, the limit falls to 0, and it's basically like Bitcoin. So it's a good time to learn about us. But yeah, come check us out. And if you're into the fundamentals of consensus, learn how Saito consensus works because it's going to blow your mind. We hope.
Yeah, I think it will. I appreciate you coming on today, sir. Always appreciate your time. Addie, you as well. David, I wish you nothing but the best moving forward. Hopefully, like I said, we can talk again in the next maybe year or less. So thanks.
Sure. Thanks both of you for your time. Okay.
Absolutely. Have a good night.
Yeah. Bye-bye.